When you're building out a website and you're adding text to a page, you may notice in your editor or builder of choice that one of the options to treat that text is with letter spacing. Now, letter spacing is the horizontal space between the characters in a whole sentence. This is not to be confused with kerning. If you're a designer, you may be familiar with kerning, which is the individual space between two individual letters, not an entire sentence as a whole. And kerning is most commonly used in print design. But with letter spacing, you're controlling the space between letters for an entire sentence or paragraph all at once. So keep in mind, the larger the number of letter spacing you're adding, the more far apart those letters are going to be, and vice versa. If you have a small number or even negative letter spacing, the tighter your letters are going to appear. As you're designing a web page and laying out your text, you should always be properly treating your text with proper letter spacing. Sometimes it can help improve readability, and it could also damage readability if you do not use it properly. I'm going to walk you through a few case examples of how to use letter spacing properly, as well as a few ways that you should not be utilizing it. So I set up a demo page for us here, and I've got a subhead, a H2 heading, and then some body copy. Now, one of the first rules I want to tell you about is when it comes to body copy or any copy that is not all uppercase like our subhead here, you really should not be adding any positive letter spacing to it. The best use of letter spacing when it comes to this type of copy that's body copy or regular sentence copy is to add just a little bit of negative letter spacing to help tighten up your text. So for example, if we look at this H2 heading, by default, this has 0 letter spacing at all. And with this particular font, you could tell it could use a little bit of negative letter spacing because the width between characters is just a little bit too far apart. So if we select that heading and generate blocks, we can come on down to our typography panel and add a specific letter spacing measurement here. So I'm going to say negative 0.01 EMs. And so when it comes to adding negative letter spacing, it's going to be in much smaller increments than it would be if you were adding positive letter spacing. So as you can see, that tightened up our heading 2 a little bit. We can even do 0.02 EM and tighten it up a little bit more. I still think that looks great. It's easy to read. I would not go beyond 0.03 EMs, however. Anything tighter, say 0.06, and then it just becomes too muddled up together and harder to read. Now, body copy is the same way. As I mentioned, you don't really want to add positive letter spacing. If we went in here and added 0.5 EMs of letter spacing, this looks terrible, right? Even 0.2, this does not look good and should not be done for proper design. Now, if we did want to tighten this up a hair, we could again go in and add maybe negative 0.02. That's a little bit too tight even. Oop, that was 0.03. 0.01 tightens it up quite a bit. That's probably the max tightness of letter spacing I would add to any body copy. But keep in mind, every font and how it's treated in the letter spacing and how it appears is different. So if you're going in, maybe following along with me here, and you're adjusting the letter spacing on your body copy, yours might actually not be as tight as mine at 0.01 EMs. So use your judgment a little bit. Just know that visually you have to trust your eye in knowing what does look best. Now on this body copy, I think I'm going to lessen it even more and say 0.005. So we can see if I remove that, it expands, and I add it back in and it tightens it up a little bit. So again, body copy is one of those you don't want to add a whole lot of negative spacing unless this particular font you're using is a little bit different and is too far apart in its natural state with 0. All right, now the last part on letter spacing I wanted to talk about is treating it in subheadings. Now, subheadings is the scenario where you definitely want them to be in all uppercase. This is my preferred design method. I think that as a subheading, it just helps it stand out from the H2 heading below it much more when it's all caps. And then we can go ahead and play with the letter spacing as well. Now, contrary to the negative letter spacing we are adding to our H2 and body copy, for this subhead, we want to actually add positive spacing and can start at around 0.1 EMs. So now you can see it definitely helped spread out our characters a little bit and looks pretty good now, but my default to go for is 0.2 to 0.25. I always feel like this is a good middle point that's not too spread out and it's still readable. Now the max I would really recommend is 0.3. Anything beyond that, say if you did 0.6, it just becomes too hard to read when the letters are too far apart, and then the space in between words becomes too similar to that spacing as well, and it all becomes sort of one mushed together word. So I wouldn't go any farther above than 0.3 Ms, and start out with 0.1 Ms and work your way in between those two measurements. Well, I hope you learned something today about letter spacing, and we'll pay closer attention as you begin to lay out new text on your websites moving forward. Remember, you should always be treating all the copy on your website for best design practices. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.